I got fined $500 because my dog sneezed. Not barked, not howled, not mauled, a child sneezed. Like apparently even pollen had become a criminal offense in my neighborhood. And that was the morning I realized some people don't join an HOA to keep the grass neat, they join because deep in their soul, they've always wanted to be a mall cop with a clipboard. It was a Tuesday in Jupiter, Florida, already hot enough by 8 in the morning to make you question your life choices. I was standing in my driveway in basketball shorts, old t-shirt, coffee in hand, trying to enjoy the last few quiet minutes before work. My rescue beagle Buster was doing what beagles do, nose down in the St. Augustine grass, chasing some imaginary scent like it owed him money. Then the hedge beside my flower bed started moving. Not a breeze. Moving. I froze. Buster froze. And out of my bushes rose Beatrice, 70-something, pastel visor, matching tennis skirt, face pulled tight with purpose, holding her phone out in front of her like she was serving a warrant from the kingdom of hell. Buster got startled and sneezed. That was it. One sharp little dog sneeze. Beatrice shoved her phone closer to his face, tapped the screen with one pink fingernail, and gasped like she'd just caught me running a meth lab. 54 decibels, she said. I recorded it, David. I have it on record. I just stood there blinking, trying to decide whether I was still asleep or having some kind of heat stroke. I said, Beatrice, why are you in my bushes? And she actually drew herself up straighter and said, enforcing the covenants, conditions, and restrictions of Whispering Palms. Then she handed me a citation. $500. Because under some brand new amendment, no pet in the neighborhood was allowed to make noise over 50 decibels at the property line. 50. You know how quiet that is. That's rainfall. That's a decent fridge. That's lower than normal conversation. She had basically declared war on anything in the community with lungs. I tried to explain that Buster had sneezed, that sneezing was not a behavioral choice, but she snapped, a rule is a rule, slapped the yellow paper onto the hood of my car, and drove off in her lifted golf cart like she'd just cleaned up Dodge City. Whispering Palms had not always been insane. When I bought the place, it was just a quiet, overpriced Florida neighborhood with palm trees, a pool, and the usual petty nonsense about trash cans and mailbox colors. Then the old HOA president moved away, and Beatrice climbed onto the throne like she'd been preparing for it her whole life. She packed the board with her friends, a little retirement-age junta of busybodies who treated the whole neighborhood like a prison yard. Street parking was gone. Basketball hoops were gone. Mailboxes had to be painted some awful shade of coastal beige. Then came the new pet noise rule passed at an emergency meeting I missed because I was at the dentist, which feels fitting somehow. While I was getting my teeth scraped, they were out there chewing through the Constitution. Over the next 2 weeks, it got ugly fast. They fined the Smiths because their golden retriever barked at a squirrel. They fined the Garcias because their parrot squawked near an open window. It felt like everybody was living with their shoulders up around their ears. Then one afternoon, the mailman dropped a package on my porch. Buster let out 2 full beagle howls, and Beatrice appeared like she'd been waiting in ambush 3 houses down. This time the fine was $1,000 plus a certified letter from the HOA attorney saying I had 48 hours to remove the animal or face daily penalties, a lien, maybe even foreclosure. I wish I were exaggerating. I'm not. That night I packed up Buster's bed, toys, bowls, the whole little life he had in my house, and drove him to my parents' place across town. They had a big fenced yard, no HOA, and a neighbor who played drums badly, so Buster was going to be just fine. I was not. Driving back to my own house without that dog in the passenger seat felt like something had been taken out of me with a scoop. The place was too quiet when I got home, and I sat at the kitchen island with a glass of bourbon and the HOA rulebook spread open in front of me like I was studying for the angriest bar exam in America. I read every line, every footnote, every amendment, every bit of smug little legal language they thought nobody would ever read. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, half blind and halfway into another pour, I found the weakness. The rule banned loud pets. That was it. Loud pets. It did not ban weird pets. It did not ban terrifying-looking pets. It did not ban silent animals that could make a grown adult rethink every decision that led them to this exact sidewalk. So I started thinking the way angry, sleep-deprived people think. Creatively and probably not in a healthy way. I went down a rabbit hole of silent animals. Snakes felt too subtle. Spiders were too small. I needed something visible, something that didn't have to do a thing except exist, and suddenly the self-appointed hall monitors of Whispering Palms would need fresh underwear. And that is how I ended up learning more than any sane man should know about domesticated skunks. Turns out with the right paperwork, they can be legally owned in Florida under wildlife rules. And the best part, they're quiet. Really quiet. Some little chittering a foot stomp if they're annoyed, but nothing close to violating Beatrice's precious decibel law. There was one problem. My HOA also had a blanket rule against wild animals. So I kept digging. That's when I found the state law on Florida-friendly landscaping, the one that says HOAs can't block homeowners from using environmentally beneficial landscaping practices. Native plants, water-smart design, natural pest control. That whole world. And right there, buried in the overlap between state law, wildlife permitting, and HOA arrogance, was my opening. If I created a Florida-friendly habitat and legally classified the animal as part of a natural pest control setup, Beatrice would have to argue with the state of Florida instead of just terrorizing me on my driveway. The next 3 weeks, I became the most determined bureaucrat in Palm Beach County. I filled out permit paperwork with the intensity of a man planning revenge in fluent legalese. I called a licensed exotic breeder up near Ocala. I got approved. I built the paper trail. And then I met Barnaby. 12 pounds, black as midnight white stripe down his back, giant plume of a tail, looked like a warning label had learned to walk. I won't lie to you, the first time I saw him I almost started laughing. He looked like chaos in fur form. Then the breeder handed him to me, and the little guy tucked himself against my neck and made the softest sound barely audible. Right there I knew I had found my loophole with paws. Back home I called my friend Mike, a contractor built like a refrigerator with a beard that looked load-bearing. He pulled up in his battered truck, took one look at my sketch and said, "Dave, is this for a zoo or a felony?" I told him I needed an escape-proof habitat integrated with native Florida plants. He squinted at me for a while, then asked the right question. "What kind of animal?" I said, "A biological pest deterrent." He stared at me. I stared back. Finally he said, "You are making me regret being your friend." But he built it anyway. Steel mesh, deep anchors, strong latches, native plants all around it. By Tuesday afternoon, my side yard sounded like a shipyard. Hammer drills, grinders, cement mixer. Glorious noise, all perfectly legal during approved contractor hours. Naturally, Beatrice showed up before Mike even finished the second post. She came storming across my driveway with that phone app in her hand, yelling over the grinder that I was violating quiet enjoyment. I handed her a laminated packet with the state law highlighted, and I swear to you, watching that woman read actual legal language was one of the purest joys of my adult life. Her face kept changing colors. She said, "What is this habitat for?" I said, "Natural pest management." She said, "For what kind of pest?" I said, "The regular Florida kind. Roaches, grubs, things that crawl." Which was true. I just left out the part where the pest control had a fluffy tail and excellent dramatic timing. By Friday it was done. Saturday morning I put a little black harness on Barnaby, which felt like trying to dress a sleepy loaf of bread with claws, and took him for a walk. You ever see a whole neighborhood remember it evolved from prey animals in real time? Because I did. Brenda from down the block dropped her giant cup in the driveway and backed into her house like she'd seen death itself. Gary, a grown man in jogging shorts, saw Barnaby near the fountain and flung himself sideways into the community water feature without even breaking stride. Lawn crews stopped mowing. Curtains started twitching. Barnaby, meanwhile, just waddled along in total silence, sniffing flowers and minding his business like the tiny striped king he was. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. Beatrice came flying over the hill in her golf cart, hit the brakes hard enough to tear up grass, and shouted from a safe distance, "What is that?" "Not who." "What?" I said. "This is Barnaby. He's my biological pest control agent." She looked like her spirit left her body for a second. Then she started yelling about rabid wildlife, common areas, public safety. I told her to check her app. "Go ahead. Check the decibel reading." Barnaby had not made a sound. Not one. He was the only pet in the neighborhood fully compliant with her own stupid rule. She threatened police animal control eviction, divine wrath, all of it. I smiled and said, "Have a blessed day, Beatrice," which in that moment was as close to violence as I could legally get. She called the authorities within minutes. A police cruiser and animal control rolled up to my house while I was sitting on my porch with Barnaby in my lap and a glass of iced tea in my hand. The cops wanted distance. Animal control wanted paperwork. That part, thankfully, I had. Permit, vet records, vaccine records, scent gland removal certificate, microchip, everything. The animal control officer flipped through the binder and basically shrugged. Legally owned, properly documented, nothing to seize. Then Beatrice arrived with 2 board members behind her like she was bringing witnesses to my execution. She started yelling that HOA rules overrode state paperwork. The older officer looked at my highlighted statute, looked at her, and you could just see it hit him that he'd been dragged into an HOA knife fight with no extra pay. He told her this was a civil matter and warned her not to abuse emergency dispatch again. You should have seen her face. It looked like somebody had told her the sun now belonged to the poor. That should have ended it, but petty people don't stop when they lose. They escalate when they get embarrassed. 3 days later, I got summoned to an emergency HOA hearing, threat of lean, hostile environment, forced removal, all the usual melodrama. So I showed up Thursday night at the clubhouse with Barnaby on my shoulder. The room gasped like I'd brought a live grenade to Bible study. Beatrice had their lawyer there. Expensive suit, expensive tie, expensive expression. He started making a speech about hazards and noxious spray and danger to the community. I let him go on. Then I slid the vet certificate across the table and said very calmly that Barnaby had been dissented as a baby. No spray, no glands, no odor weapon, just fur feet and excellent compliance. You could hear the whole room shift. Not physically, not loud, just that human sound when a crowd realizes the villain may have overplayed the hand. The lawyer read the paper, leaned toward Beatrice, and I watched the confidence leak out of both of them at the same time. Finally, he stood up and said the board was withdrawing the citation. Just like that. Gone. Then I hit them with the part that really mattered. Since they couldn't legally interfere with my protected habitat, and since Barnaby didn't violate the noise rule, and since they definitely could not keep trespassing onto my property with decibel apps anymore, I was bringing Buster home. And I did. The next day, Beatrice resigned. The rest of the board repealed the pet noise ordinance so fast it was almost graceful. I picked Buster up from my parents' house that afternoon, brought him home, opened the back door and watched him trot into the yard where Barnaby was nosing around near the plants. Buster sniffed him. Barnaby sniffed back. No drama, no barking fit, no cloud of doom, just 2 little weirdos figuring each other out while the Florida sun dropped low over the fence line. I stood there with my hands on my hips, looking at my dog back where he belonged, and I'm telling you there are few feelings sweeter than watching a bully get taken apart by their own rule book. What I learned from all that is simple and not exactly cheerful. Power makes small people weird. Give the wrong person a clipboard, a bylaw, or a little title by their name, and they start thinking they're the law instead of just another neighbor with thinning patience and bad knees. But I also learned this. If somebody wants to use rules to make your life smaller, sometimes the only answer is to read every last word, stay calm, and beat them so clean they have to help carry the lesson home. So tell me, when someone abuses a little bit of power like that, what counts as justice and what counts as payback? And if you've ever dealt with a neighbor, board member, landlord, or local tyrant who thought they could push you around, tell me what happened. Did you let it go, or did karma get there first?